Good evening, church. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. You'll bear with me. I'm just recovering from cold. My voice is getting better, but I hope you'll be able to hear and understand everything. I just want to thank you for inviting me to share with you some of the issues that we deal with all the time, especially of finances. Tonight we speak about budgeting, which is very critical for individuals and families. And you will see that because of budgeting or lack of it, there are so many problems when it comes to personal finance management. Now, what are we going to talk about? These are the topics we'll discuss. First of all, we'll address those basic principles that are critical for personal financial management. And then we'll look at general observations and look into the spirit of prophecy, looking into what actually is happening right now in our midst. And then we'll discuss why do we need to budget. And we'll also go into couples budgeting, where a husband and a wife need to work together in terms of budgeting. And we'll also bring the issue of train up your child, because children need to understand budgeting and finances. If they don't, you'll see what they'll do to you with their demands. And then we'll come to the conclusion. Now, let's talk about the basic principles of personal finance. The first thing we need to understand is that God is the owner of everything. You own nothing. You've got nothing. Everything you have belongs to God. Genesis 1, verses 1. God started calling everything, creation, into existence. There was no Adam at that time. Adam has never had any let there be, which God said, because he was not there. By the time Adam was made, everything was there. So that is why, if you look at Psalm 50, verse 12, God says, I wouldn't even come to you if I need anything, because everything that I have created is mine. I still own everything. There is nothing that God has ever lost. The only thing that God has ever lost is you and me when we fell into sin. But God still owns everything. Through stewardship, which brought me here, God is trying to reconcile you and himself through Christ. So God is the owner and the creator of everything. Our purpose in life is nothing else but to glorify him. He says in Isaiah 43, verse 7 and 21, these people I have created for myself, for my glory. He created us for himself. It is not about you. So it's all about him. Colossians 1, verse 16 says, all things were created. He mentions them by him and for him. So we need to understand that. Tithe is the minimum testimony of our Christian commitment. Brothers and sisters, if you want to be able to manage your finances, faithfulness in tithing is critical. How do you go about managing that which belongs to God when you do not obey him? He says, if you love me, keep my commands. You are my friend if you do whatever I tell you. That is those 2 Johns, 14, 15, and 15 and 14. And hereby we do know that we know him, when we keep his commandments. So we can't come here every Sabbath, claim to know him, when we don't keep his commandments. And his command is simple. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse. It's not a request. It's a command. Debt is bad. Bahaeshu, skoloto hasaloka. The borrower is the slave to the lender. That's what Proverbs 22 verse 7 says. And Ellen White says, avoid it as you would avoid smallpox. You know what she would say today. Prosperity is having what you need when you need it. Economics told me that wants are unlimited and they keep on coming back. You will never satisfy wants. You live in a shack, the next thing you want a 4-room. Out of the 4-room, you want a 6-room. Out of a 6-room, you want to go to the suburbs. Wants keep on coming back. You never satisfy them. You ride a bicycle, a scooter, the next thing it's a car, the next thing you want to fly. Those are wants. They are unlimited. Now, those texts there tell us about contentment. Apostle Paul says, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I found myself. Now, we struggle with that. And hence, we look at the Joneses because we are not content. We want to look like them. So contentment is critical as Christians. Now, why do we have problems with finances? And what do finances cost to our families? This is what Edward G. Reed says. Financial factors contribute to 90% of family breakups. So it is not your mother-in-law who is normally the source of the problem. It is the finances, and you'll see why. Families overspend every month. Why? Because they don't budget. As money comes in, it goes. And the major culprit here, we are told, on finances is not a question of how much you get. It is how you manage it, how you handle it, and how you plan your finances. And my wife will tell you that our domestic, when she arrived in 1989, we told her that we don't buy on credit in this house. We buy cash. If we don't have money, we don't buy. So she started saving. We gave her an endowment, 200 rand. Five years later, she's got 18,000. Then she increased to 400. 5 years later, she's got 38,000 rand. A domestic. Yet, in the area where we lived in Protea, there were teachers and nurses. Some of them may have never seen 40,000 rand, but a domestic could have it. So it's a question of discipline. Very few families have a family budget or individual budget. We don't. We spend as money comes. Lack of family planning is a problem and a source of serious problems in families because we don't plan. Now, Ellen White wrote that, we are no different from the world. We behave as the world behaves. The way we spend, the way we plan, the way we do things, there's no difference. When they look at us and they see just the same people. How we spend, we are in debt. We are over machonisa all the time. Libona by machonisa. So what's the difference between us? We are struggling as if we serve a God who cannot provide. So we need to be careful that we should stop building as worldlings build, dressing as worldlings dress. Now, she further wrote in Counsels on Stewardship that many poor families are poor because they spend money as soon as they receive it. Why? Because they haven't planned. They have no plan. They have no budget. So as it comes, it's spent. As it comes, it is spent. Somebody knocks at the door, say, "Atengisa," and then people just want to buy. But have you planned for that? Is it on your budget? Lack of budgeting or family budget causes impulse buying. Because if you don't have a plan, it's like getting into a car not knowing where you are going. You end up anywhere. She carries on in the Adventist home. you must see that one should not manage his affairs in a way that will incur debt. When one becomes involved in debt, he is in one of Satan's nets, which he sets for souls. So debt is the net that the Satan will set for us. Because once we are caught in this net of debt, God comes last. And listen to the last one. Abstracting and using money for any purpose before it is earned, it is a snare. Now, people here live on advances. Now, advance is something you get before you even earn it. It's a snare. This is what she wrote in 1897, knowing that some of us here will be gunning for what? For advances. Now, this is what has been coming up, and it has come up in many ways. That most people, after 5 days they have earned their salaries, it's gone. And they cannot even account 60% of it, what had happened to that money. Why? No budgeting, no planning. And that's a problem. Now, why do we need to budget? It is key to a successful life of personal financial management. You know, it shows a lot of commitment. You know, what we achieve in budgeting is that we have direction of our family goals. We know what we are doing. We can make informed decisions. You know, it puts control and discipline on what God has given us. And it gives us peace of mind because I know I have 10,000 rand and I know it's going to do A, B, C, D. It provides even for emergencies. I don't go about, asking. It happens, and you have seen it many a times when there is an emergency in some families. People what how gazata, hey, are to say, and that exposes us, Horna. What kind of God do we serve? Where we are so disorganized, we don't plan, we don't budget. When we have crisis, we go like anybody else. That is why Ellen White says we live like the world. We go about begging, going to machonisa. Budgeting brings professionalism because it makes you to think that you know what you are doing. It instills that organization and planning in your life. And it is a joint responsibility in a family. If you leave your husband to do budgeting alone, here is a true story, that one day a sheriff arrived at this Seventh-day Adventist home, and he said, I've come to repossess the house. And the wife said, you have come to the wrong address. And the sheriff said, is this not Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so's place? And she said, yes, it is. And then she turned around and she looked at her husband, and he looked down. Never did she get involved in budgeting and seeing to it that everything was paid for. And they were kicked out. It happens many a times. There are men, we are told, who would even leave every morning going to work which doesn't exist, which they have lost because they are ashamed of telling their spouses that they have been retrenched. Now, if you don't check these things and work with your husband and check that the budget has been fulfilled, everything has been paid, it's a joint responsibility to avoid surprises. Now, here is just a sample budget. And, it's a sample. It's up to you how you want to allocate. You could allocate around there, those figures. First of all, remember, tithes and offerings are critical. If you start with them, the rest will be fine. But if you start with the rest, then you are going to have problems. So a budget for housing, mortgage, and other things, we Edward G. Reed suggests that around 35% you could put that. And food for education, cars, and so on. It is not nice to stay in a shack and park a BMW next to it. It doesn't make sense. Or in a township, you are in a garage, you live in a garage, and you have parked a more expensive car next to it. Your priorities are rather upside down. So this is important to give you guidelines as to how to spend your budget. And of critical importance here, it's savings. Savings is the reasons why most people get into debt, because they don't save. People are in debt because there are no savings. If they had saved, there would be no need to go into debt. Now, we are urged to save at least 10% of our earnings. In other words, you earn 10,000, 1,000 must be saved every month. We also have this issue of black tax. So we have cousins who believe we have deep pockets, and they always come to us. And it is our culture. So if we play big and you don't budget and you don't save, you are going to go and get an overdraft to help other people, which doesn't make sense because you play big. And some people do that. There are people who have gone for overdrafts because they've been asked to help and they don't want to appear that they don't have money. And they get into debt just to help. Now, be very, very careful to budget for everything, even entertainment. Because that Nando's comes from your salary. The money you use to buy Nando's does not just fall. It comes from somewhere. So when you go out, it must be in the budget and say, this is how much I will spend. Don't make it too tight because you won't stick to it. And it doesn't make sense. So make it reasonable. There will be mistakes, but over time, you get used to it. Budget is very important. As you can see here, doctors, medication, toiletries, everything is covered. Car insurance, everything is in there. Petrol, everything. It must be budgeted for. You need to list all your expenses and all your incomes. And then you say, how much do we do? And you'll see it when we start talking about the next item of couples budgeting by Marvin Kamachi. So what does he say about budgeting? And like Edward Reed, he says, finances are a major factor of marriage failures. The same thing Edward Reed said, communication about money issues is essential. Here you've got a spouse. He is doing something for his family. She is doing something for her family, and they are not communicating. Only to find that she is in 100,000 overdraft, he is in 50,000 overdraft, and they are all in trouble because they don't communicate. And that's what we find. I mean, we talk to people who have such situations. Now, lack of cooperation in this area will lead to higher probability of marriage failure. Marriage will fail where people are just spending money for the family and not talking about what's happening with it. And now, Proverbs 24:3-4 says, through wisdom, a house is built, and understanding it is established. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. And these three virtues here, which is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, we are going to deal with them right now. Now, the application of these three virtues will culminate in the promise of a precious and pleasant riches. That is where there is understanding, where there is wisdom, where there is knowledge in the family about what's happening with the finances. Now, let's look at the first one, to build through wisdom. He says, husband and wife bring different ways of managing finances in their marriage. In other words, the way you used to manage your funds or your finances is different from the way your spouse has been doing his or hers. And there is likely to be disagreements if you want to keep your own way and his own way. So how then do we resolve this without communication? You see, an approach used to manage personal finance may not be optimal. The optimal approach could be the one where spouses come together and they talk. But your individual way of managing finances may not be optimal for the family. So it should be necessary that during courtship, during counseling before you get married, these things are discussed. How do you run your finances? What debts do you have? What responsibilities do you have? Because you don't want to come into marriage and then she is responsible for siblings, your mother-in-law and everything, and you didn't know. But if you discuss these things, you come into the marriage with expectation, knowing what she's responsible for and how you can fit and how you can support. They need to understand that once you get married, we no longer talk about my money, your debts. No, it's our money, it's our debts. It's surprising, brothers and sisters. You know, a man and his wife can get into bed and do whatever they want there, be vulnerable to each other there, but not in the bank accounts. Failure on any of the above will result in problematic financial partnership. If you still say, my money, your debts, you are heading for a problem. She's going to take debts, and at the end of the day, if you are married in community, the law says they are your debts anyway. So communication is very critical. Transparency is very critical in marriage, so that the spouses have accountability of their accounts. Now, to establish understanding, this phase emphasizes the necessity of good communication, transparency between partners. It will lead to understanding. Partners need to talk openly and transparently about their finances. I mean, the others don't even know what the other is earning. Maybe, you know. You need to be open-minded about these issues. In this phase, partners work on numbers together, come to agreement on financial management. And here are the steps you need to take for understanding. You shift from my money to our money. All income should be put into one common basket. And I'll clarify that, because I know somebody says, no, I'm not going to give my husband or my wife my salary. As somebody once said, my husband wants my salary, he won't get it, I won't give it to him. Now, all what it means in simple terms, everyone needs to be accountable for the money he or she earns. You have your account, you don't want to share one account, it's fine. But you need to account for every cent in your income. This makes it our money because I know what you use it for. Step number 2, the peacemaker. Decide how and where to distribute your income. You need to jointly say, Here is a budget. What do you take? I'll do this, you'll do this. You agree. That has to come, that has to be discussed. And it's very critical to agree on these things. You elaborate on this budget, you agree how much money is distributed, you commit to budget strictly, and any deviation from the budget is discussed and agreed. You don't just wake up and change your mind and say, you know what, I think I should do this, and you don't tell her or you don't tell him. You agree on any major modifications. It must be a mutual agreement. When the set agreements are committed to and guidelines and boundaries established, upheld, harmony in marriage is experienced. Because there are no surprises. There are no surprises. Now we deal with the third aspect. To be filled with riches by knowledge, there must always be mutual agreement for decisions taken by a married couple. It must be acknowledged that you will make some mistakes going forward, but you learn from your mistakes. Because Hosea, as you know, 4 verse 6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, lack of communication, lack of sharing information. God has promised that we will be successful if we are faithful to Him. We must seek financial knowledge. We must not be ignorant. We need to know how to budget, how to save. We need to know how to use credit cards, when to use, when to pay, and when not to pay. We need to know how to get out of debt, which we are going to take you through on Friday. How to get out of debt, because some of us are in deep debt. But we are going to show you that in a program in 10 years, if you have debts from Woolworths until you are home loan, it can take you 10 years. If you don't have a home loan, it can take you 5 years. So we are going to show you how to come out of debt on Friday night. So it is very important also to learn about investing and savings. Like I told you about our domestic, and my wife will tell you even about her aunt, who was a nurse, who came to her and said, you know what? You must be the executor of my will. Here are the documents, keep them safe. She never looked at them. When she died, we opened the package, we found bank statements, and one of them had 2.8 million rand. We said, how could a nurse have 2.8 million? And at that time, because it was 2 years after he had given us this thing, she might have had way over 3 million. How could a nurse have millions in her bank account? And when we looked at how much she has been saving for all the years, it was between 350 and 500 rand. That's what she saved for consistently. In one of the presentation on savings, we show that young people who could start saving for 40 years, saving 5,000 rand, you could end up with you could retire a millionaire. Savings is critical. And that's what most of us take it for granted. We don't save. Now, we need to teach our children how to manage their finances, because they have a perception that mom and dad have deep pockets. A young man in Mpumalanga didn't want to work. He completed school. And then my sister-in-law asked him, why don't you look for a job? And he said, you see the techies I'm wearing, I don't know what they call them, sneakers or whatever they call them. If I work, I'll never afford them. But because I don't work, my parents can buy me these things. And what she did, she organized a meeting because her parents were just ordinary laborers. And then she said, share with him how much you earn. That boy was so disappointed, so ashamed of himself when he realized how little his parents were earning, and he started looking for a job. Now, some of us don't share that information with our children, and they think our pockets are deep. They never know how deep they are. They must be part of the family budget. They must know where the money goes. You see, this goes to food, your clothing, your school fees, your books, and this and this and that. When they see that and they see what is left, it's nothing. Their demands will be accordingly because they understand. But as long as they don't know, they just think they can make demands, and mom and dad will always provide. You need also to learn to allocate allowances for your children. This is the part which my wife does very well, because she started giving our kids, who are now married men and women, those allowances at the age of 7. My son blew it the first day he got it. And he thought he would be helped when he needed money. We said it was for the month. You get nothing. And he soon learned that this 20 rand I'm getting per month is for the whole month. And when we go on holiday, they have their allocation. We buy main meals and accommodation. Ice cream, all these other things, the rides is for them. And then we went to Durban, and we were passing by the ice creams. And I said, guys, don't you want ice cream? They said, no, we don't want ice cream. It is their money. They know how to use it. No more unnecessary demands. It instills discipline, and it teaches them responsibility and budgeting. You will be free as a parent because you are not going to be bothered. Yeah. Teach by precept, in other words, what we say, and by example, what we do. Teach by instruction. Teach them diligently. That's what the Bible says. Talk to them, instruct them. When you sit, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise up. That's Deuteronomy. Teach your children for their independence, so that one day when they're independent in their families, they know how to run their finances. They don't go into debt. We create a mess in this world because we don't teach our children, and they just plunge into marriages without knowledge. Parents have neglected their responsibilities and pushed them to schools and to churches, and even hope the police would help them when they do wrong. That is not right. Children are to be taught to love and to obey God and to know about finances. It is critical. Children see 50% of marriages fail. Many start out life facing debt of all sorts because, some of these banks, they start them when they know they are at final years at varsity. They start giving them loans. Those who used to qualify as doctors, by the time you qualify as a doctor, you've got an overdraft of 100,000 account open for you. Student loans, They face those challenges without financial training. They never learn how to handle money. And they come into marriages with that. This is the responsibility of parents. It cannot be delegated anywhere else. We have to train our children by providing them with allowances. And as they become older, even responsibility of buying clothes for themselves. That's what you need to do. Allowances may need to be earned. It's not that you just give them for the sake of it. They work for this. They must clean the dishes. They must scrub the floors. They must make the bed. They must work in the garden. They must earn this money. That's what you need to do. When every young children should be educated to read, to write, to understand figures, to keep their own accounts. That's Child Guidance, page 136. They must understand figures. That's what they need to do. When they're old, you open accounts for them. They start managing their own accounts. They buy clothes for themselves. These are the responsibilities you can give them so that they have an understanding of how money is used. Because if they don't have it, they find themselves in debts. And starting a life with debt is a problem. When our daughter wanted to get married, my wife asked her, do you have money for your wedding? And then she said, I don't want debt. I said, well, we can support you, but it is not our wedding, it's yours. So you have to budget for it. We were 40 people on a Thursday. 40. 10 from my family, 10 from my wife's family, and then the other family, the man, and 10 from her friends. And there were also photographers. All of us were 40. Now, that's what she could afford. It's not our wedding, it's hers. So why should I fund it? And when they finished school, they started working, they stayed with us. We charged them lease. They paid for staying in our home. They were working. If they were staying somewhere, they would pay. So we charged them. They paid. And I told my son when he turned 28, I said, when you turn 30, I don't want your money. You must be out. And he looked at me. I said, yeah, I don't want your money when you are 30. And at 29, he got married. He left. Because they need to learn independence. Because somehow, one day, we are not going to be there, and they are going to be doing this. What is it that we owe to our children? A religious upbringing, family worship, church attendance, church participation, because we need to train up our children in the way they should go, so that when they are old, they will not depart from that we taught them. You look at Daniel and his friends. You look at this little girl who is unnamed of Nyama, the leper, who could say, if my master could go to, he will be healed. They knew what they stood for. There must be a willingness to work and appreciation of it. We must start teaching our kids to work. We are tired of give me society. People who feel entitled to get without working. So if we do that, then it's an investment in our children because they know how to use the money they earn. They learn diligence and integrity. This is very important for our children. A good education is what our children need, and responsibility and accountability. If we can, let's avoid students' loans, because when they finish, they are in debt. If we can save, we will avoid those students' loans. We need to plan our expenses. We need to determine what our wants and our desires are. We need to teach our children that even during school holidays, they could get vacation work and they could start learning to work and earn a living and know how to use the funds they earn on their vacation living. You know, all biblical principles for personal management apply to children as well, not just to adults. In other words, the issue of faithfulness, tithing, savings for the future, avoiding debt, and budgeting, these are not only for adults, they are also for young people as they grow. Now, this is what Ellen G. White wrote on education. Let every youth and every child be taught not merely to solve imaginary problems, but to keep an accurate account of his own income and outgoes, that is expenses. Let him learn the right use of money by using it, whether supplied by the parents or by their own earnings. Let the boys and girls learn to select and purchase their own clothing, their books, other necessities, by keeping an account of their expenses. They need to know how to do these things. Otherwise, they are just in the deep end when they've never learned anything. Why? Because young people who never learn to work or manage money are poorly equipped to enter the job market and live independently. They just start with debts. They know less about saving, spending, and budgeting. They just plunge into debts. And some are influenced by their peers who just run and after the first pay, he buys a BMW. You know, on savings, there are a lot of guys who talk about their experiences, how they messed up their lives. They are chief executives, they are executives, how they started. One would say, I bought a top-of-the-range BMW. I had to return it in 6 months. You know, and all of them say their secret was contract savings. In other words, saving where it's automatic. When you receive your salary, certain amount is taken as savings, automatic saving. If you're not disciplined, that's the best thing you can do. Because if you can do that, then you are sure you are saving, you are disciplined. That is the problem we have, discipline. Now, in conclusion, brothers and sisters, we need a family budget. We need an individual budget. But we need to remember that God comes first. Children must be trained properly to manage their finances. Lack of financial management, we have heard from Edward G. Reed and from the other author, it is the source of marital problems. Lack of financial management will destroy the future of families, especially where there is no communication. It's my money, it's your debts. Good financial management may create a society that appreciates working in order to earn a living and eliminate a give-me society. Let's teach our children responsibilities so that they can earn a living without being give me, give me, give me. Good financial management also will benefit the church, because if we are good managers of our finances, we'll see tithes and offerings improving in the church. That is what is important, brothers and sisters. Budgeting is critical. If we don't budget, we just create havoc for our lives. But I need to tell you that until you surrender your life to Christ, until you become faithful to Christ in your tithes and offering, you will forever struggle with personal financial management. Because the Bible says, the Lord is He who gives you the capacity to create wealth. Now, if He gives you that capacity to create wealth and you don't honor Him, how then can He bless you to use what He has given you? You will always struggle with contentment, even if you have enough. And yet, there are people who earn so little and they are content with what they have because they are faithful. God gives them contentment. Let us be faithful to our God because God will bless us how to use it. And He'll even open opportunities for you to earn more. God bless you. Amen.